women who have been on the pill or, an IUD or something where they're not getting a period at all. So
Mhm.
often it takes months before that period comes back. And then another common thing I see when that's been the case, the period comes back with a vengeance. So many women that, were put on the pill or an IUD as a band-aid because say they had estrogen dominance, maybe they had endometriosis, maybe they had really painful, heavy periods, and the medical establishment was like, okay, yeah, go on the pill, that'll kind of suppress everything, but it doesn't heal the root cause, right? So as soon as you go off the pill, all that stuff within a few months probably is going to come back with a vengeance.
Welcome to Resolve IBS and IBD Naturally. I'm Courtney Cowie, a nutrition therapy and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. If you are struggling with the symptoms of IBS or IBD and want to get to the root cause of your symptoms so you can take back your health through a whole person approach, this podcast is for you. Just a disclaimer that the information I'm presenting in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. You should always consult a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your health or medical regimen. That being said, let's get on with the show. I'm excited to have my friend and nutrition colleague, Abby Vallejo, on today. Abby and I actually touch base on a regular basis, and we've had a lot of really great conversations. We're hoping to kind of dive into some of the things we've talked about as we feel like some of these concepts and ideas will have value for you. So I really hope you enjoy these next few episodes with Abby. All right, Abby. Well, I'm super excited to have you on today. I feel like it's interesting how we met through your mom many years ago, and we had, a really great connection because I think just philosophically, we were at a similar point in time. Both of us were really interested in kind of the law of attraction and some of the different resources out there centered around just empowering yourself to manifest your own life through thought processes, right? Through all those things. And we won't go too deep on that, but we had such great conversations years ago. And then as it does, life got busy and you and I were kind of both on paths to expand our knowledge and learning and meeting different people and, partnering up and growing families and the whole nine. And so what's so cool though is that we both ended up going down a nutrition centric career path and but different from one another, which is really, really cool. And now we've kind of come together after so many years to reconnect. And that's just been so awesome. And I appreciate your support and just like, willingness to bounce ideas off of and just, be a good sounding board, right? Like, because we're both in the work and we struggle with a lot of the same challenges. We have a lot of the same like excitement and just like, it's the whole gamut of, how do you make a successful practice helping people, but then also what is the right way to go about it. So you and I have had some great conversations on that. And so we're going to dive into a really meaty topic today. But before we do that, I want you just to talk a little bit about, your journey, your background, how you got interested in nutrition.
Yeah, okay. I thank you. I love how aligned we are and I love that we've reconnected. It's just, yeah, it's perfect. Okay, my background, well, first of all, so I'm a holistic licensed healthcare practitioner, a registered dietitian, certified personal trainer, and health coach. So it's kind of like a three-in-one, tying it all together. I've I've really always been interested in health. But it kind of reluctantly, when I was younger, having health problems, it was the thing that really started getting me interested in this. So growing up, I had horrible digestive issues. I would have, anything I would eat, I would get nauseous, and this would go on for years. I couldn't eat until I was completely full. Um, a lot of times I'd wake up in the morning and I'd know that I'd need to eat, and I would have to run to the kitchen because, my blood sugar was dropping and I was feeling like faint and dizzy, and yet I'd eat and then I'd feel nauseous. So back in the day, mom took me to the doctor. They wanted to put me on Prilosec for life. That was like the solution. Thankfully, my mom was like, no, we're not doing that. But we didn't really have any other options at the time. So she was like, okay, yeah, I don't want her on the Prilosec. But at the same time, what else did we do? So, me just being kind of young and, teenager kid, not really knowing, I just started eating until I was only about 75% full. And that kind of helped. but it didn't ultimately fix anything, right? But it was just kind of the way I managed it. And so I was just kind of used to going through my life, like eating these small, frequent meals, right? The thing they used to tell us to do throughout the day, just kind of grazing and never really eating until I was completely full. And it helped me manage it. But as I got older, I started to have more problems. So then when I was in my 20s, started getting bloated all the time. I started having to run to the bathroom multiple times per day, multiple bowel movements, like, lots of diarrhea, just really uncomfortable and embarrassing things, like I was working in an office and I was the one that was constantly running to the bathroom again, right? And so
I feel ya.
at this yeah, yeah. Oh, have you been there? Like, my goodness, right?
Oh my God, that's my journey, Abby. I
Yes.
get you.
Like, well, there I go again. Okay, not done. Yes. So I'm dealing with this. I'm in my mid-20s and I'm like, damn, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm supposed to be healthy. And yet, I'm having all these issues. What's going on? So there was a few like huge pieces that I then discovered. So one of them being a digestive piece, and then one of them being on birth control and how much that messed up my hormones. So going back to digestion, which is kind of what I was talking about, I figured out that I had a gluten intolerance. And, I hadn't made the connection for so long because, in those days, I had no idea that a gluten intolerance, you might not be feeling those symptoms right away. In fact, I could eat gluten and not feel the symptoms until like 8 or 10 or even 16 hours later. So, in my mind, in my early 20s, I had not made that connection. Luckily, I had a friend who was gluten free and she told me, she's like, hey, no, you're not going to feel it right away. You probably are going to feel it hours later. And then it really clicked, and I was like, oh my God, okay, yes, it is the gluten. So I decided to do an elimination diet. I got the gluten out. I got off sugar at the same time because I was just like, there's so many things that are sugary that have gluten. And, I'd been kind of wanting to eliminate that anyway. So just cold turkey, everything. And in the following weeks, I started feeling so much better. Because I had been literally bloated every day. Like this was just something that I was dealing with all the time. And suddenly I was not bloated every day. I was not running to the bathroom all the time. Like that, all that stuff started normalizing just from cutting out the gluten and the sugar. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then kind of paralleling that. So as so many other women and young women, we're put on birth control to help regulate us. And, of course, um, and, I had been on the pill. And when I started, other than my digestive issues, which, I've kind of always had, I was healthy. I didn't have any like diagnosed conditions. Everything was pretty good. And then I'm on the pill for a while, and suddenly I'm getting these awful symptoms that seemed more in alignment with like menopause. Like I was getting hot flashes, night sweats, I was getting like vaginal dryness, sex was painful. I started like I got some like bone rib injuries, which I think my bone mineral density was going down. I would get reoccurring UTIs, which I had never gotten before in my life. And then with the antibiotics that come with that, then later I'd go on to get a yeast infection or bacterial vaginosis. And this happened again and again and again. So I got in this vicious cycle where I'd get a UTI, I'd go on antibiotics. And of course, they didn't tell me like I needed to go on probiotics either. So I'm doing all these antibiotics. And then I'm wondering, why am I getting yeast infections? Why am I getting bacterial vaginosis? I mean, I was a hot mess. And I remember going to my gynecologist, who was a man. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I remember going to him and being like, hey, I think it's the birth control pill. There's nothing else in my life that has changed, and yet I'm a mess. All these things are wrong. The only thing I'm doing differently is the birth control pill. And he's like, no, it's not. I think you're kind of making this up in your head. And I was just like, dude. You're not a woman. How would you know? I know you're a doctor, but you're not a woman, So he was nice, but he just kind of patronized me and just kind of, he wasn't dealing with what I was dealing with. So I was like, okay, clearly that's, I can't go to my doctor for help. Like I need to figure this out on my own. So that started, and I was already getting more and more interested in health with, what I had researched on gluten and things like that. So I'm like, okay, we're going to do the same with hormones. I'm going to figure this out. I know it's the pill. So I went off the pill. And I started doing research on, hormones and how do I rebalance and everything. So long story short, and it took me a long time in those days because I did not know what I was doing. But what it did do is I had this passion for health and for digestion and for hormones, for women's health. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to become a practitioner. And so the route that I went first was I became a registered dietitian. And then from there, I just continued the education down the pathway of women's health and hormones and kind of just tied that all in because my mission, because of everything that I've lived, and I'm sure so many other women can relate and have had similar experiences of, living through these awful symptoms, being kind of denied and dismissed by, the medical establishment. My goal is to empower women with knowledge and to teach them about their hormones, about their bodies, so they understand. So when they go in, they know what questions to ask. They know when they're kind of being dismissed. They have the confidence to listen to their own intuition and make their own decisions and seek out practitioners that are literate, functional, and literate and holistic. And so when you go and you meet them, to trust your own intuition to know, okay, yeah, I like what this person is saying. I'm going to trust them. We're going to come up with a plan and, go on this journey back to health together. So that's basically my mission and how I got started in this field.
I love that. Yeah. And I think I kind of had remembered you telling me about the whole gut component. I think actually when we first met, you were probably right in the throes of a lot of that too.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
kind of remember having those conversations. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's how most of us start. It's like that little seed gets planted. You're kind of in it, doing all the research yourself. And similar thing to you, like I eventually was like, well, crap, if I'm putting all this time into this, I might as well
That's
and then if the interest is there, that's when it really takes off. And I think like to your point, you had experienced the power of how, what you eat is so connected to how your body functions. So of
mm,
course, why wouldn't hormones have that connection point too, right?
yeah.
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 Did you
Absolutely.
were you on birth control pill for quite a while before the symptoms like showed up, or was it like you had switched to a different type and then it started to really like change?
Oh, I'm trying to remember because I was on two different types of pills. I know I had started one birth control pill when I was in my teens. I think I was 17, which is so common and such a little pet peeve of mine. So many girls at that age, they're newer to having their cycle. Their cycles are still irregular, and then you go to the doctor and they're like, "Oh, this pill will get you regular." When it's a time when your body is finding its own rhythm and being irregular is completely normal. So I just had to insert that little soapbox moment. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I was on a pill in my late teens. And then, if I remember correctly, I actually kind of had a little pause in between and then went back on it in my early 20s. And I think that was probably a different pill. And that's when the symptoms really started. I don't think it took very long after I started that pill that they really started cropping up. And I would imagine that I was also kind of accumulating problems with, the poor digestion. I probably had some nutrient deficiencies that were already kind of happening. I already had a few years on another pill, and then I get on this new pill, and my body was just like not having it, not happy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's so interesting because like as I'm listening to you talk about this, like what also is coming up is just I think just in the general population, there's a lot of myths around hormones. And you and I both admire Dr. Lindsay Berkson as a practitioner, and she's
Yes.
gone super deep on this whole topic. She loves to get into controversial things and kind of like unearth these myths. And so one of them being like how demonized estrogen is, right? But
Mhm.
then I think I've even heard her make the point, like one of her lectures she did, like it's interesting though how like birth control pill itself is a synthetic form of hormones,
Yes,
right?
I love that you're saying that because
Yeah.
there's so many, those old myths about like hormones are bad for you. You never ever since the Women's Health Initiative in the early 2000s, so many practitioners are still reluctant to,
Give them.
do hormones and do bioidenticals, even though that has been disproved. But then they're so eager to prescribe birth control. And I'm like, that is hormone replacement therapy as well. Because when we go on birth control and we're getting synthetic forms of estrogen and progesterone, it stops our own endogenous. So endogenous is of our own body for the listeners, right? It stops our own endogenous production of hormones. So when I do hormone testing on women, even young women who are in their 20s and 30s, we would expect to see good, buoyant, good, robust levels of hormones. And they've been on birth control. They are so depleted, they almost look postmenopausal. And that was the case for me too. And that's because they're taking this artificial pill and it's basically suppressing their own production. And yet, we're never told this. We're not warned that this is going to happen, So that's something to say about informed consent. It's like, do you want to take this pill? Sure, but you need to give the information. What could potentially, what's going on? What can happen?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. This is just such a fascinating topic. Like we we could talk on this I'm sure at length, but no, I mean I agree. And I think the sad part of that is I'm not the expert when it comes to like what does birth control pill do to the gut, but I definitely have seen in some of the functional testing I've run that especially estrogen dominance tends to be more of an issue in women with gut dysbiosis, and that could
Mhm.
be maybe because I'm not saying progesterone out of whack is a good thing either, but it does seem to be like this kind of common picture you see that sets a stage for more inflammatory states, like of the body in the gut. And,
Oh yeah.
a lot of this, I think, again, starts when we go in with these synthetic drugs and we start manipulating how things are supposed to work. And then I'm sure you've seen this too. I've heard the stories. I haven't actually worked with a client in this position, but just women going off of the pill and then not being able to like reestablish a cycle in certain cases too.
Oh yeah, and I get a lot of clients like that who are going off the pill or have gone off the pill, and it takes months before. I mean, I'm talking like 6 months to a year sometimes. I mean, we can speed that up if if I'm working with them and we're specifically rebalancing the hormones. And
Yeah.
but this was my case back in the day, right? Like how many months did it take me to re-regulate my hormones after? I mean, I was still getting a cycle because I was getting a cycle the whole time, but like women who have been on the pill or, an IUD or something where they're not getting a period at all. So
Mhm.
often it takes months before that period comes back. And then another common thing I see when that's been the case, the period comes back with a vengeance. So many women that, were put on the pill or an IUD as a band-aid because say they had estrogen dominance, maybe they had endometriosis, maybe they had really painful, heavy periods, and the medical establishment was like, okay, yeah, go on the pill, that'll kind of suppress everything, but it doesn't heal the root cause, right? So as soon as you go off the pill, all that stuff within a few months probably is going to come back with a vengeance. And so a friend of mine who was on the pill for many years and wasn't getting a period went off. When she got her period, she bled for 36 days straight.
Oh, that's so depleting. Oh my
And it
God.
was heavy. Like she became anemic. We had to get her on iron and do all the things because she was bleeding so much.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is a really common thing that and that, that doesn't last. And obviously we can take measures to fix that, but that can happen, right? Because you haven't actually, the pill didn't actually fix anything. It was just suppressing. And if you think about how the cycle is kind of like a detox, like a purge that the body does every month when it's not given the opportunity to do what it does naturally, it's probably a little upset. It's like having pent up anger, right? You haven't been able to express yourself, and finally you get the opportunity to, and it's like, whoa.
For sure, Abby. I know. And actually, I'll just share like a little story. This might be like too much information, but like, when
It's never TMI. In
it's
our
never
world, it
TMI,
is
right?
never
Like
TMI.
I'll put it out there because like I'm pretty open about, the struggles I've had with my health too. We'll talk about that in depth at some other point, but just to put this piece out. So after I'd had my daughter, this was prior to getting a diagnosis of microscopic colitis. That's like a whole nother story, but needless to say, I had a lot coming out, like just
Mhm,
constant loose stool, right? Which
mhm.
is depleting in another way.
Yeah.
But then this was before I really went down the rabbit hole and got, a lot more trained on functional testing and even, got into the whole circle with, some of the hormone experts like Lindsay Burks and David
Mhm.
Brownstein, those people, right? So,
Yeah.
going to see the midwife, and I'm probably 2 months postpartum, whenever it's okay to start going up in the vagina and messing around again. And she's like, well, let's put a IUD in there, that'll, and I stupidly, I said, okay. And I'm like, well, give me the one with the lowest amount of like hormone.
Mhm,
And it
mhm.
was like super duper painful actually putting it in, which shocked me because I had two
You
natural
had, yeah.
water births.
Yeah,
Like
you had given birth. It shouldn't have been so
it
painful
shouldn't
at
have
that
been
point.
painful. It was in it like birth was pretty intense because I didn't have any medication and really awesome experience to go through, like insanely intense experience to go through. But I was amazed and I'm like, wow, for having birthed like three babies over my lifetime, like this
Mhm.
is really, really painful.
Yeah.
And then after that, Abby, I kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And after a month or so of that, I'm like, screw
Mhm.
this. I am not going to do this. And I went back in, I'm like, take it out. Take it
Yeah.
out. We're going to use a different method. I don't
Mhm.
care what it is. I'm like, I didn't go on the pill, but I'm like, I'm going to put the onus on my husband now, or we're going to figure it out together through natural
Mhm.
mechanisms because this is
Mhm.
insane. Because I knew at that point, I'm like, I am not going on a pill either. Been there, done
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
But I think just that whole experience really made me appreciate kind of like you're saying with empowering women, like how important it is I just feel people can disagree with this, but I just feel women should be taught or go seek out information to figure out how their body works, know what part of their cycle they're in at any given day of the month,
Yes. Yes.
ideally, if we're doing things healthfully and supporting the body through good nutrition, lifestyle, sleep habits,
Mhm.
I believe women can achieve a relatively consistent cycle once they've matured, right?
Oh yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, but I think that this notion that, women should be idiots when it comes to tracking where they're at in their cycle and, an oops, I got pregnant. Like, I know this is going to be so controversial, but like, I really feel like not really though, because like, even as a woman in her early 40s now, I can tell when I'm ovulating. I can tell where I'm at in my cycle. I mean,
Mhm.
I do use an Aura ring, full disclosure, a little bit of a
Yeah.
cheater method
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
but even if I didn't, there's signs that I've learned to connect with those different stages of the cycle. And, that's been just hugely empowering, right? Just to be like, well, I do have control over this on some level,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because this is such a big part of what I teach. Like, I think living in this, and not to, like rip on men or anything, but living in this male-centered world and health model, so often women are left behind and we're not empowered to learn, to really dive in and learn about how our bodies are unique. We're not just small men that, oh, we just happen to get a period, 1 week out of the month or whatever. You know, I mean, it's astounding to me. And I was in this boat too, how little we know about our own bodies, right? And how empowering it can be to learn about our bodies. So this is kind of my mission of what I'm teaching women. And when there's some few simple things that if you know them, it can just make all the difference in the world and how much easier you're able to regulate your hormones and your cycle, even with just like diet and lifestyle. So
oh,
if
for
you don't
sure.
mind, I'll actually kind of share the basics of what I teach because I think it
Yeah.
could be really helpful.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode. Can I ask you a favor? Would you be willing to hit pause, give this podcast a quick rating, hopefully it's a 5-star, and even leave a comment or question that I'd be happy to respond to? This really helps to beat the podcast algorithm so that this free content can reach more people struggling with gut health issues like you. I appreciate your feedback and willingness to support this podcast. Now back to the show.
So these are things that every woman should know, whether you're getting a period, whether you're not, whether you've gone through menopause, we all go. So I always say women are cyclical beings, right? We go through phases. We go through a cycle every single month. And even if you've gone through menopause, you're still a cyclical being. You still have cyclical hormones. So here's the thing. Men have testosterone. They're kind of even Stevens. They just kind of have testosterone every day, all day, all month long. They have their own little cycles, but they're pretty steady Eddie. Versus us, we also have testosterone, which some women don't know. We actually have more testosterone in our bodies than we have estrogen or progesterone, but we have much less than men. That's why we're
Right.
women. Then we have estrogen, and there's 3 different types of estrogen, even though we tend to call it just one thing. And we have progesterone, which are our main estrogen, progesterone, like our main female sex hormones. So we have different hormones coming out to play at different phases of the month. So let me walk you through what those are and why that matters. So the first day that you bleed, the first day of your period, that starts what I call the estrogen phase. That lasts for about 10 days. So through the cycle to about day 10. Now, during this time, a really like awesome thing to know, estrogen does not love high blood sugar. So during this phase, I always tell ladies, this is a good time to have more of like a low carb, kind of keto-ish style diet. You don't want to spike the blood sugar during this time. So healthy fats, proteins, things like that. Days 1 through 10. Then we have ovulation. That's the next phase. Now, this is kind of a window because we ovulate on different days, kind of depends on the woman, but it usually falls somewhere between day 11 and day 15. So remember, day 1 is the first day you bled. You would ovulate somewhere between day 11 and 15. Now, during this time, estrogen has been rising, 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 rising. And during ovulation, we start getting some testosterone coming into play. This is usually when we start to feel amazing. We start to feel beautiful. We start to feel sexy. We're full of hormones. We have testosterone. We have estrogen. Our libido might be going up. I mean, this is a time when we're kind of like goddesses, right? Our inner goddess comes out. Because we have testosterone, not only are we going to be more in the mood, we also have more potential to build muscle. So with my ladies, I'm always like, hey, this is the time you want to get in the gym. You want to start lifting those heavier weights because you're going to have the most potential to build muscle.
Mhm.
Diet wise, all your hormone, well, your estrogen and testosterone are peaking. So we want to be supporting detoxification. So yes, we want lots of protein because we're building muscle, but we also want like green leafies, big green salads, things like that to support the liver detox because you make hormones and once they do their job, they have to get metabolized and excreted out of the body. So we want to support the liver, we want to support metabolism to help naturally metabolize and detox out those excess hormones so that we stay naturally balanced. Then after ovulation, so the following phase, everything kind of dips and all of our hormones go low. Oh, I forgot to say, so during ovulation, kind of a Mediterranean style diet is ideal, right? So if you've been eating low carbs and estrogen, now you can kind of bring some carbs back in. Then going into dip phase, which is days 16 to 19, all hormones kind of dip and go low. You kind of get a little lull. And to your point, how you were saying you can tell when you ovulate, I can always tell. I can always tell when I'm in ovulation because I feel strong, I feel sexy, and then you kind of get to dip phase and it goes, eh.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, I'm in dip phase. Like obviously I track my cycle, but I would know anyway because now I'm in tune with it. I'm used to it. So you get to dip phase, everything kind of dips. This is a good time to go back to that lower carb, to support gut health. And have that more like keto-ish style of eating during this time, right? Don't want to spike blood sugar. This is a time because I also do intermittent fasting. This is a time when I like to do longer fasts. Like today, I'm doing a 36-hour fast, which is a wonderful one to burn belly fat, by the way, if anyone's interested. Obviously, I've worked up to doing that. I wouldn't say do that if you've never fasted before, but being a regular intermittent faster, the dip phase is a great time to do those longer fasts. So that's days 16 to 19. Then starting on day 20. So if we're going off the average length of a woman's monthly cycle, which is 28 days, day 20 to 28 would be progesterone. Now, this is the phase where I say every diet ever has failed us as women because it has not taken progesterone into account. Why is that? Progesterone's needs are so different than estrogen's. So when I said that estrogen likes low carb, progesterone is the opposite. She actually needs our blood sugar to be a little bit higher. And this is why, ladies, we naturally crave carbs and get really hungry that week before our period, because your progesterone needs to be fed to come to a healthy peak, to have a healthy cycle. So no shame in needing some carbs this week. Now, obviously, I don't recommend everyone go out and eat a bunch of donuts, but having like healthy carbs, bringing in like potatoes, squashes, things like that. This is the perfect time to do that. Also, taking it easy. We're going to have less energy. It's the time that we're most likely to be irritable and maybe a little less social. I'm not going to have the same strength that I had in the gym in ovulation in progesterone. So I back off on the workouts. I do things that are more gentle, restorative. I mean, I'm a weightlifter. I love lifting weights, but I'll go like lighter, more reps, lighter weight, less sets. I'll take it easier on myself during this time. And what I found is that if you do that and you really baby yourself that week before, so you're bringing in the healthy carbs, you're taking it easy, as much as you're able, don't schedule like stressful things during that time if you're able, and you really just give yourself that grace during that time. By the time your period gets there, it's going to be so much easier. You've just had a week of rest and some indulgence. You're going to be ready to get right back in. And then as soon as I get my period, then I'm back in the gym, I'm back in the low carb, and I'm ready to go feeling great. And so this brings me to when people ask me, because this is probably one of the most common questions I get as a dietitian, what do you think of this diet? What do you think of keto? What do you think of that? What do you think of this? I always say there is not one diet that any woman should be following every day, all month long, because we are cyclical beings. As you can see, as I've just walked you through, each hormone that comes out to play in each phase has different needs. Estrogen's needs are so much different than progesterone's. It's like two different personalities. And so if we can tailor our diet and our activity and our lifestyle to each phase, I mean, that's like the ultimate biohacking. We can become like superwoman. And so when you know that, you know how to live your life accordingly. And also the other thing I love about it, it's sustainable because it ultimately you're not really denying yourself anything. By the end of the month, you've gotten all the things. You've had a low carb phase. You've had a time when you can have your carbs. You've had times when you were doing harder workouts. You've had times when you were doing easy workouts. Every woman that I've ever explained this to has been like, yeah, that resonates. That makes sense. So this, and this isn't cycle, but it's basically cycle syncing is what it's called. I didn't invent it. It was first introduced by Alyssa Vitti, who's a functional nutritionist. She wrote Women Code, which was that like 2010 maybe, or 2016 that came out. So there are lots of practitioners, mostly female practitioners, on the leading edge that are starting to teach this. But this is the kind of thing that when women learn this, they take it and they run with it because we just intuitively know this makes sense for us.
Yeah. No, I love all that, Abby. And I feel like it kind of gets back to like this inner wisdom that we all have, that there are these little like inklings the body will give you. And now
Mhm.
granted, people could get sugar cravings because they've got major gut
Yeah,
dysbiosis
there
or
can be
bad,
other things there,
right,
but
like
your
bad
body
gut.
has its own wisdom. It will speak to
It
you.
will. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of why like using even the word diet isn't super awesome, honestly, in that like
Mhm.
it's more of a way of eating, right? Like we're looking
Yeah,
for like a lifelong sustainable way of listening to the body and then allowing the body to kind of self-direct which foods it wants based on those own innate signals. And,
exactly.
kind of as you were talking, I thought about like originally when I was going to become a nutrition therapy practitioner, my instructor, she might have had more of a hormone lean now, thinking back, Abby, but she was like, yeah, I have a little toddler at home. And what we do is we like put options in the refrigerator, like bone broth, some kind of like healthy meat, blah, 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 like fruit, whatever it is. And she's like, well, when she's hungry, she'll just go over, like if it's mealtime, kind of bang on the fridge. And then we open it and she self selects what she wants.
Wow.
Yeah, based on, and it's interesting because sometimes it's like she goes for the bone broth and sometimes it's like
Mhm.
she wants some fruit or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really interesting. And, that is kind of philosophically how I was originally taught too, is like there isn't one specific diet that's going to work for every given person out there. And so much of this depends on where your body's at as a woman hormonally, obviously
Mhm.
what's going on with the gut. There could be a lot of stuff kind of like
Mhm.
playing a role. But yeah, I mean, it allows so much more freedom when you don't have to be boxed into just like a very regimented one way of eating. Because I'm sure
Yeah.
people could find foods they enjoy on a high fat, high protein diet, but then
Mhm.
after a while that would get old. Same thing with like a
Yeah.
high carb diet. Like there'd be a point where I think my blood sugar would be very unstable if I was on that
Yeah,
all the
yeah, no,
time, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so much more sustainable. It makes so much more sense. And then, because the other thing too is like there's certain diets that therapeutically short term, they work really well. I'm not against any of them, like
Yeah.
carnivore or keto or things like that. There's a time and a place for sure. But I think what a lot of people don't realize, especially women. So here's the thing. Men will go and they'll do something like that long term. They'll lose weight, they'll get great results, they'll feel great. Their testosterone thrives on something like that, right? And then we just go because this is what the, society and the medical model kind of has told us till now, you can do whatever a man does. You just do the same thing, that the man does. They treat us as if we're the same, like small men. So then women go and do that. They might get great results initially, right? Because it is therapeutic.
Mhm.
But long term, oh, suddenly my hair is thinning and falling out. Oh, my hormones are getting messed up. Oh, I'm having trouble sleeping and I'm getting really irritable and moody and bad PMS. And, the list goes on. And I hear this all the time. So usually you feel great those first few months, but how are you feeling 6 months, a year, 2 years after that, right? Suddenly now that weight loss that was happening, you're plateauing. You're
Yeah.
not getting any results anymore. And if anything, you're kind of going backwards and suddenly nothing is working and you're stuck. And that's because we as women should never be on the same exact thing every day, just ongoing. That does not work for us as cyclical beings. We have to switch it up. We have to cycle things. We need new, stimuli as well for the metabolism. And so that's why I'm like, no, I'm not against those things. But as women, we need to be smart. We need to work smarter, not harder, right? So we
Right.
need to learn how to cycle those things in at the appropriate time. Or maybe you're dealing with a really intense health issue and you need to do that for a few months. Maybe you're doing carnivore keto for a few months, you're healing your gut, and then you're going back to the way of eating long term that makes sense for women that's not going to cause a hormonal imbalance over the long run.
Yeah, no, I love that. And this is actually like a perfect segue into like the next topic I want to dive into. But before we do that, Abby, I want you to mention, because you had said you have a free resource that kind of lays all of this out for people,
Oh
right?
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And I made this because as I'm explaining it, I realize it's a lot. If you've never heard this before and you're like day one to what and then what, like it's a lot. So what I do is I have a free PDF resource that lays it all out super clearly. It explains the different phases, and then I have, the days, and then I have how to tailor your diet and your workouts under each phase. It's been so helpful. I've gotten such good feedback on it. So it really just breaks it down. I have that on my website. So if you go to balancedhormonesvip.com, and then if you across the top, one of the options will be resources. It's just my free resource. You can sign up and get it right there. Print it off, save it on your computer, show it to every woman you know, especially if she's got hormonal issues. I highly, highly recommend it. It's, my resource is completely free. It's literally just because I want you to be empowered and I want you to know how your body works. Now, like I said, even if you're not cycling, I have a whole thing in there if you're postmenopausal or if you're irregular, how to do it. So that'll be in there as well.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you spoke to that. Yeah, and I will link it beneath in the show notes too, so that people can just click on the link.
Perfect.
So before we close out this episode, I just want to touch on the concept of intermittent fasting that Abby spoke of when she was going through her cycle syncing nutrition lifestyle plan. So I highly, highly recommend that if that's something that appeals to you, interests you, that you either look into joining Abby's membership group to get some guidance and supervision around that, or work with a qualified practitioner one-on-one. I've found in the vast majority of clients that come to work with me, when I run a nutrition assessment questionnaire with them, which is a sort of a subjective assessment tool that I use initially with all of my clients, that the vast majority of people actually have very significant sugar handling challenges. And by that, I mean trouble making it 4 to 6 hours between meals without crashing and burning, whether it's energy, concentration and brain issues, needing caffeine as a pick me up, getting literally shaky if they don't eat frequently. And I just find that foundationally speaking, a lot of people have to be taught how to optimize their diet across 3 square meals a day and get very regulated and stable there first before dabbling with something more extreme, such as extended fasting periods. And part of the reason why is because when I've seen people come to me who have done a lot of intermittent fasting just on their own and don't have those foundations of a whole foods, anti-inflammatory diet in place, they're often dealing with some degree of weight loss resistance, mood dysregulation, energy stability issues. And these are all classic signs that they're not managing their sugar levels well, and that, it would behoove them to go back to the foundations and get their diet really solid, work on getting the inflammatory foods out and getting the body really well adapted to moving between stores of fat and sugar to burn fuel before starting to challenge it with longer extended fasting periods.
Did you find this episode informative and helpful? I'd love to have you leave me a 5-star rating. Do you have questions about holistic approaches to optimizing gut health that you'd like to ask? Please leave your question or comment below, and I will be sure to address it personally or cover it in a future episode. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode. See you next time.